If you can't afford this, I'll quit on the spot, Kevin Miller said as he slammed his hand against the glass counter, making the $12,000 handbag inside the luxury display case shake under the spotlight. His voice echoed through the boutique like a public execution. Aaliyah Johnson didn't step back. She was already standing right in front of the display, holding the access tablet that controlled the entire store's smart inventory system. Kevin leaned closer, lowering his voice but making it sharper. Go on. Touch it. I dare you. A customer laughed nervously behind him, but stopped when the automatic security gate near the entrance suddenly clicked into lock mode. The store lights flickered once. Aaliyah didn't react. Her fingers stayed still on the screen. That system she was holding didn't just track inventory. It controlled security locks, pricing sync, and the private vault beneath the store. Kevin didn't know any of that. He just smirked, enjoying the moment. But the manager had just crossed a line he couldn't see. I watched him lean over the glass like he owned the entire building. The air inside the store turned tight, almost metallic. My name tag read Aaliyah Johnson, but nobody here really used it when speaking to me. To them, I was just another floor associate in a uniform that never fit quite right. Kevin walked around the counter slowly, tapping the glass with his knuckle. People like you shouldn't even be near this section, he said loud enough for the customers to hear. A few shifted uncomfortably. One woman even stepped back from the display. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed on the tablet. One line of code blinked quietly on the screen. A system override request waiting for approval. He mistook my silence for weakness. That was his second mistake. The first had been touching the luxury vault authorization chain without knowing who controlled it. Behind me, the automatic fragrance system released a soft wave of amber scent through the vents. A normal feature of the store. But today, it mixed with tension. Even the music lowered slightly, as if the building itself was listening. Kevin crossed his arms. You know what? I've been waiting for someone to step out of line today. A security guard shifted near the entrance but didn't move in. Something about the locked gate made him hesitate. The system wasn't supposed to engage like that without a manager override. But Kevin didn't notice. I finally looked up. Not at him. At the glass behind him. Outside, a black SUV pulled into the curb. Engine silent. Tinted windows. The store assistant near the entrance froze. His earpiece crackled once. Then silence. Kevin followed my gaze and scoffed. What now? Your ride home? The doors opened before I could answer. A man in a tailored suit stepped in. No badge. No hesitation. Just presence. The store went quiet in a way that felt engineered. He didn't look at Kevin. He looked at me. Ms. Johnson, he said calmly. The board is waiting for your confirmation. Kevin blinked. Once. Then again. His confidence didn't vanish immediately. It cracked. What board? He muttered. I lowered the tablet slightly. The screen reflected in the glass case. My access level lit up in gold. Store override. Ownership clearance. Global retail control layer. Kevin saw it. But he didn't understand it yet. The silence stretched. Too long. Then the system in my hand pinged once. A full authorization request just escalated to executive control. And Kevin Miller finally realized he had been speaking to the wrong person this entire time. The display case behind him unlocked itself with a soft mechanical click, but what opened next wasn't the store. The assistant in the luxury store froze for half a second as the system display behind the counter shifted from standard retail mode into executive override access. I could feel Kevin Miller still standing behind me, his presence heavy, confused, trying to make sense of what he was seeing but refusing to accept it. The man in the tailored suit remained still near the entrance, his attention locked on me, not Kevin, not the customers, just me. The entire store had gone quiet except for the soft hum of climate control vents and the faint clicking sound of the unlocked display case settling into position. Kevin finally broke the silence with a forced laugh, but it came out unstable, like it did not belong in the room anymore. "What is this supposed to be?" he said, stepping closer to the counter, eyes darting between the tablet in my hand and the changing security indicators on the glass panels. I did not answer immediately. My thumb moved once across the screen, confirming a secondary authentication layer. The store lights shifted slightly warmer, a sign that central ownership protocols were now active. A second notification appeared, this time from the corporate system network. It carried a tag Kevin had never seen before: Regional Authority Validation Pending. The assistant near the door swallowed hard, his hand hovering near his earpiece but not pressing it. Outside, the black SUV remained parked, engine still off, as if waiting for permission to exist in front of the store. The man in the suit finally took a step forward. His shoes made almost no sound on the polished marble floor. "Mr. Miller," he said calmly, finally acknowledging him, "you are currently operating under a suspended management credential." Kevin turned sharply toward him. "That is impossible. I have full control of this location." The man did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked at the tablet in my hand again and gave a small nod, like confirming a system he already understood. "You had control," he corrected. The word had hit differently in the room. One of the customers quietly placed a bag back onto the shelf, as if deciding she no longer belonged in this moment. Kevin's confidence began to fracture further, but he still tried to hold on to authority. "Who exactly is she?" he asked, pointing at me with irritation rather than fear. The question hung in the air longer than expected. I finally raised my eyes fully toward him. Not as a response, but as a confirmation that he had already lost track of what mattered. The tablet in my hand shifted again, revealing a new layer of access logs scrolling upward rapidly. Store-wide permissions, vault synchronization, pricing authority, and security routing were all being reassigned in real time. Kevin stepped closer, now speaking lower, as if volume could restore control. "You do not have the right to override my store operations." I tilted the screen slightly so he could see the ownership header clearly. His eyes scanned it once. Then again. The realization did not come all at once. It broke into him in pieces. First confusion, then disbelief, then stillness. The assistant at the door finally whispered into his earpiece, but stopped halfway through the sentence. The system had already locked his channel. The man in the suit stepped aside slightly, clearing the space between Kevin and me. "She does," he said simply. Kevin's breathing changed. Not fast, not loud, just uneven, like his understanding of the situation could not stabilize. The store behind him felt different now. Even the air conditioning seemed quieter. The security gate that had locked earlier disengaged with a soft mechanical tone, not as an act of permission, but of confirmation. I set the tablet down on the counter for the first time. The screen remained active, glowing with layered authorization codes that Kevin was never meant to see. He looked at it, then at me, then at the man in the suit, searching for an explanation that would restore the version of reality he had been living in minutes ago. But nothing matched anymore. And when the store's main system chimed once more, signaling full administrative transfer, Kevin realized something else was already moving behind him in the network he had never been allowed to understand. The silence inside the luxury store had turned into something heavier than noise, something closer to authority settling into place. Kevin Miller stood frozen near the counter, his eyes locked on the tablet that no longer belonged to him in any meaningful way. The system screens across the boutique continued updating in slow synchronized waves, each panel shifting from standard retail display into executive control architecture. I could feel the shift not just in the system, but in the people around us. Customers stopped pretending they were shopping. The assistant near the entrance lowered his gaze, stepping slightly back from the door as if distance might protect him from what was unfolding. The man in the suit remained calm, watching everything with the patience of someone who already knew the outcome but was waiting for the subject to understand it emotionally. Kevin finally spoke again, but his voice had lost the sharp confidence it carried earlier. "This is some kind of internal error," he said, forcing the words as if repetition could restore reality. No one answered him immediately. Instead, another notification appeared across the main store panel, larger this time, spanning multiple screens. It confirmed a full operational transfer request initiated and approved. Kevin read it once, then again, his posture tightening as if the words physically resisted comprehension. "No," he said under his breath, shaking his head slightly. "That is not possible." I stepped slightly to the side of the counter, giving him a clearer view of the system logs. The access hierarchy was no longer abstract. It displayed names, permissions, and ownership layers that extended far beyond this location. Regional control, national distribution authority, and private retail equity all aligned under a single verified identity. Kevin's eyes tracked the screen, moving faster now, searching for a loophole, an exception, anything that could break the structure forming in front of him. But the system was not presenting ambiguity. It was presenting confirmation. The man in the suit finally spoke again, his tone unchanged, almost calm enough to feel distant. "Mr. Miller, your role has been limited to operational oversight only. That authority has now been revoked by the primary stakeholder." Kevin turned sharply toward him. "Primary stakeholder? This store belongs to corporate headquarters." The man shook his head once, subtly, as if correcting a misunderstanding he had heard too many times before. "Not this division," he replied. The phrase landed differently in the room. It did not sound like confrontation. It sounded like clarification of a fact that had existed long before Kevin entered the building. I watched Kevin's attention shift back to me. For the first time, it was not arrogance or irritation. It was uncertainty trying to find structure. "You are just a floor employee," he said, but even as he said it, his voice did not commit to the statement. It broke slightly at the end. I did not respond verbally. Instead, I reached for the tablet again and rotated it so he could see the full ownership profile. The interface expanded automatically, as if responding to recognition proximity. The name displayed at the top was no longer hidden behind operational layers. It was fully visible now, tied to legal ownership, financial authority, and executive command permissions across the entire retail network. Kevin's breathing slowed. Not in relief, but in recognition that his earlier assumptions no longer had any support. The assistant near the entrance whispered something again into his earpiece, but the device remained silent. System communication had been disabled at the network level. Outside the glass storefront, pedestrians continued walking, unaware of the structural shift happening inside. The black SUV remained parked, still, unchanged, as if waiting for the internal system to finish resolving itself before moving again. Kevin took a small step backward. The sound of his shoe against the polished floor felt louder than anything else in the room. "You cannot just take control of a location without authorization," he said, but the sentence no longer carried authority. It sounded like someone reading a rule that had already been rewritten. The man in the suit looked at him briefly, then at me. "She did not take control," he said. "She confirmed it." That distinction caused the final shift in Kevin's expression. It was not anger anymore. It was the realization that he had been operating inside a structure he never understood, and that structure had never required his permission to function. The store lights adjusted once more, stabilizing into a softer tone. The system panels returned to a steady display, no longer cycling updates, only confirming status. I placed the tablet down again, this time leaving my hand away from it completely. Kevin looked at it as if expecting it to disappear. It did not. The confirmation line remained active, steady, irreversible in its presentation. For a long moment, no one spoke. The space between us felt too organized, as if even silence had been assigned a function. Then a final system alert chimed from the ceiling. Speakers, not loud, not dramatic, but precise. It signaled completion of authority transfer across all active terminals. Kevin closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to step out of the moment mentally, but when he opened them again, the store had already begun responding to a leadership structure he was no longer part of, and the next notification appeared directly on my screen, labeled as an executive-level decision awaiting immediate direction. The executive-level notification on my screen pulsed once, then stabilized, waiting for a decision that no one in the store had ever seen triggered from this location before. Kevin Miller stood a few feet away, his posture no longer aggressive but unstable, as if the floor beneath him had changed definition without warning. The man in the suit shifted his position slightly closer to me, not interrupting, only confirming presence as the system prepared for final authorization. The entire boutique felt recalibrated, every light, every sound, every access point now aligned with a hierarchy Kevin was no longer part of. I could see his eyes moving between my screen and the surrounding environment, searching for any familiar structure to hold on to, but everything he recognized had already been replaced by layered ownership protocols tied directly to my identity. The system was not asking for approval anymore. It was waiting for instruction. I tapped the screen once, not to confirm control, but to open the executive decision layer. A detailed operational report unfolded across multiple panels, showing store performance, staffing behavior logs, security overrides, and unauthorized access attempts flagged in real time. Kevin's name appeared in multiple entries, each one time-stamped and categorized under conduct review. He noticed it immediately, his breathing tightening slightly as he read the visible records that he had never been aware were being tracked at this level. "This is not standard retail monitoring," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, as if he already understood the answer he was avoiding. I did not look at him when I responded. My focus remained on the system, on the decision request that had escalated beyond store management and into corporate authority channels. The man in the suit stepped half a pace forward and spoke quietly, almost formally. "Once you finalize this layer, it will propagate across all regional systems." The weight of that statement settled into the room without resistance. Kevin's expression changed again, this time less defensive and more distant, as if he was beginning to understand that the situation was no longer localized. It was structural. He took a small step back, his hand brushing the edge of the counter for balance, not realizing he was no longer being observed as authority but as subject within a system he had been operating inside without comprehension. The assistant near the entrance finally lowered his earpiece completely, no longer attempting communication. Outside, the black SUV remained motionless, its presence now feeling less like arrival and more like confirmation of alignment. I scrolled through the executive decision panel, reviewing 3 options the system had already pre-selected based on behavior thresholds, operational integrity scores, and compliance violations. Kevin leaned slightly forward, trying to read the screen from a distance, but the interface adjusted subtly, restricting visibility to authorized viewing levels. He stopped immediately when he realized he was no longer included in that access tier. The silence inside the store became structured, almost procedural, as if every person present had been assigned a role in the moment whether they agreed to it or not. I finally spoke, not loudly, but clearly enough for the system microphones to register the command pathway. "Initiate full audit protocol and temporary suspension of on-site managerial authority." The system responded instantly, confirming execution. Kevin closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in protest, but in the way someone processes information that no longer fits into their understanding of reality. When he opened them again, the store lights had shifted again, this time subtly brighter near the entrance, indicating external verification of the decision now propagating through corporate infrastructure. The man in the suit nodded once, acknowledging the system update without emotion. Kevin looked at me directly for the first time since everything began, his voice quieter now, stripped of earlier certainty. "You were never just staff," he said, not as an accusation, but as a realization forming too late to change anything. I did not respond immediately. The system continued updating around us, finalizing authorization chains across digital and physical control layers. A new notification appeared on the screen, larger than before, labeled Executive Continuity Required. It requested confirmation for operational leadership transition beyond this single location, extending into regional governance structure. The weight of that request settled into the air like something far larger than the store itself. Kevin saw it too, and for the first time, he stopped trying to interpret what was happening in front of him and simply watched, as the next decision point waited silently for my input, and the system prepared to expand far beyond anything this moment had revealed so far. The executive continuity request remained suspended on my screen, pulsing in a slow rhythm that felt less like a notification and more like a system waiting for permission to reshape itself. The entire boutique stayed frozen in controlled silence, as if every sensor, every camera, and every transaction terminal had shifted focus toward this single unresolved decision. Kevin Miller had stopped speaking entirely. He stood near the counter with his hands slightly lowered, no longer trying to assert control, only trying to understand where control had gone. The man in the suit remained beside me, his posture unchanged, but his attention sharpened, as if he was now observing not the store, but the consequences forming beyond it. I could see the system interface expanding beyond local infrastructure, mapping out regional retail branches, distribution nodes, and executive authority layers stretching across multiple states. A single decision here was no longer isolated. It was structural. I tapped once on the screen to open the expanded governance layer, and immediately the interface unfolded into a network map of connected luxury. Locations across New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Miami. Each node displayed operational status, leadership assignments, and compliance scores. Kevin noticed the scale of it at the same time I did, his eyes widening slightly as he realized this had never been just about one store. It had always been part of something much larger. A soft system chime echoed through the ceiling speakers, followed by a calm automated voice confirming executive-level synchronization readiness. The sound was not loud, but it carried weight, like the building itself was acknowledging a shift in hierarchy. The assistant near the entrance stepped back further, now fully outside the operational boundary of decision-making, his presence reduced to observation only. Outside the glass doors, the black SUV remained still, but now a second vehicle had arrived behind it, both aligned in quiet formation that suggested protocol rather than coincidence. Kevin finally spoke again, but his voice was no longer sharp. It was unstable, almost careful. "This is not just store management," he said slowly, as if testing the words before accepting them. No one answered immediately. Instead, the system displayed a new layer of authorization history, revealing that this location had been flagged months earlier for structural review, long before Kevin ever became manager. His name appeared only as a temporary operational placeholder within a much older framework of ownership succession planning. The realization seemed to settle into him in stages. First confusion, then disbelief, then silence that lasted longer than any previous reaction. I leaned slightly toward the screen, reviewing the executive continuity request in full detail. It was not asking for simple approval. It was requesting transition of oversight across all regional luxury retail operations tied to my profile. The man in the suit finally spoke again, this time with measured clarity. "If you confirm this, all subordinate management structures will automatically realign under your direction." The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. Kevin turned his head slightly toward him. "All stores?" he asked, but the question sounded less like disbelief and more like an attempt to locate the edge of something too large to see. The man gave a small nod. "Every connected branch." The boutique lights adjusted again, brighter near the entrance, dimmer near the counter, subtly reinforcing the sense that internal structure was responding to hierarchy alignment. I studied the screen carefully. The system was not forcing urgency, but it was waiting with precision, as if it had already calculated outcomes for every possible decision path. Kevin took one step back from the counter, then stopped, as if movement itself had become uncertain. "You cannot run something this large from a single location," he said, but the sentence lacked conviction. It sounded more like something he was trying to believe rather than something he understood. I finally spoke, my voice calm, measured, and directed more toward the system than toward him. "Initiate review of regional compliance and operational integrity." The system responded instantly, expanding again. A new set of reports filled the screens, showing inconsistencies in staffing oversight, unauthorized access patterns, and repeated managerial overrides across multiple locations. Kevin's name appeared again in several flagged entries, each one tied to decisions he had made without full system authorization awareness. His breathing changed slightly as he saw the pattern forming across data he had never been shown before. The assistant near the door lowered his head completely now, as if the weight of the information made observation uncomfortable. The man in the suit stepped half a pace closer to the screen, confirming the system output without interfering. "This level of access requires full executive confirmation," he said quietly. I remained focused on the interface. The request for continuity was still active, unchanged, waiting. Kevin looked between the screen and me again, but this time his expression had shifted into something closer to recognition of scale rather than authority conflict. "If you accept that," he said slowly, "you are not just managing stores anymore." The system chimed again before I could respond. A new alert appeared at the top of the interface, labeled External Board Intervention Request. It indicated that corporate oversight from the global headquarters had detected the change in executive activity and was requesting immediate live verification. The store lights dimmed slightly as the connection initialized, and the screens began preparing for a direct board-level interface. Kevin looked at the ceiling as if expecting someone to explain what came next, but no explanation arrived. Only the system remained active, expanding outward again, preparing to connect me to voices far beyond the store, while the executive continuity request still waited for my final decision, and the entire structure of what I thought this moment was began to extend into something far larger than anything visible inside the glass walls. The external board intervention request activated without warning, and the entire store shifted into a deeper layer of system readiness, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment long before anyone inside the building understood its significance. The lighting in the boutique dimmed slightly, not as a malfunction but as a deliberate transition into executive communication mode. Every screen inside the store synchronized into a single shared interface, flattening all local control panels into one unified broadcast layer. I could feel the presence of something larger preparing to connect, something that existed far beyond the physical walls of this location. Kevin Miller stood completely still now, his earlier attempts to interpret what was happening replaced by a quiet, almost forced acceptance that he was no longer part of the decision structure unfolding in front of him. The man in the suit adjusted his stance slightly, acknowledging the system's shift with a calm professionalism that suggested he had witnessed similar transitions before, but never at this scale. The assistant near the entrance had fully stopped interacting with any device, his earpiece now inactive, his role reduced to observation. Outside the glass storefront, both vehicles remained parked in exact alignment, their presence now feeling like part of a formal process rather than coincidence. The system interface expanded again, and a direct connection layer initialized across all displays. A subtle tone filled the air, signaling that the executive board was now live within the system environment. Kevin looked toward the screens as multiple faces began to form across the digital panels, each one emerging gradually as encrypted video feeds stabilized. Their expressions were neutral, controlled, and observant, reflecting a level of authority that extended far beyond any single store or regional branch. I remained focused on the central control interface, where the executive continuity request was still active, waiting for my final confirmation. The board members began speaking one by one, their voices transmitted through the store audio system with precision and clarity. They were not asking questions yet. They were assessing. The first voice came through calmly, referencing operational continuity metrics and regional performance alignment. Another followed, reviewing compliance history across multiple locations. Kevin's name appeared again on the shared screen, this time visible to everyone in the call, attached to a structured review report detailing repeated deviations from authorized procedures. He noticed it immediately, his head lowering slightly as he saw his actions now categorized within a formal governance framework. The system was no longer just evaluating a store. It was evaluating leadership integrity across an entire network. I tapped once on the interface to stabilize the connection layer, and the board feed sharpened instantly, bringing all participants into full resolution. One of the executives leaned forward slightly on the screen, speaking directly into the system. Confirm identity verification before proceeding with full transition protocol, she said. The request triggered a secondary authentication layer on my screen, expanding into biometric and historical ownership validation fields. Kevin looked between the screens and me again, but there was no longer confusion in his expression. It had shifted into something closer to realization that this process had very little to do with the physical store anymore. It was about structural authority that had been hidden beneath it. The man in the suit stepped slightly closer to my position, not interfering, only observing the escalation with precise attention. The board interface continued updating in real time, displaying financial oversight maps, regional performance heat layers, and executive decision chains that stretched across continents. Another voice from the board spoke, this time slower, more deliberate. We are detecting full system readiness for authority transition. Confirm intention to proceed. The question was not framed as pressure. It was framed as confirmation of inevitability. Kevin exhaled quietly, the sound barely audible, as if even his reaction now felt out of place within the structure of the moment. I studied the interface carefully. Every layer of data pointed toward one conclusion: the system had already prepared for this transition long before today. The executive continuity request remained highlighted, unchanged, still waiting for my input. The store itself felt smaller now, as if it had been redefined into a single node within a much larger architecture. The board members waited silently on the screens, their presence steady and unmoving. Outside, the vehicles remained in position, and the street beyond continued as normal, unaware of the structural decision unfolding behind the glass. Kevin finally spoke again, but his voice was quiet, stripped of authority. "This is not something I can stop, is it?" he asked, not expecting an answer. No one responded. The system interface remained active, fully synchronized, holding every layer of control, every access point, every regional dependency in a single suspended moment. The executive continuity request pulsed once more, waiting for the final decision that would determine whether the entire structure remained segmented or became unified under a single authority layer, and as I placed my hand near the confirmation field, the board's attention sharpened, the store fell into complete silence, and the system prepared to execute whatever came next. The executive board interface stabilized into a full live connection, and the entire luxury store felt as if it had been absorbed into a much larger corporate system that extended far beyond the physical walls around us. Every display screen, every security camera, and every operational panel had aligned into a unified executive broadcast environment. The faces of the board members remained visible across the digital panels, observing silently, waiting for confirmation of a decision that had now reached irreversible structural importance. I kept my hand near the confirmation layer on the interface, but I did not activate it yet. The system itself seemed to pause with me, as if even it required acknowledgement of consequence before proceeding further. Kevin Miller stood near the counter in complete stillness now, his earlier confusion replaced by a quiet awareness that whatever authority he believed he had was no longer recognized by any active system within the store or beyond it. The man in the suit maintained his position slightly behind me, his attention focused on the board interface rather than the physical space, as though he was tracking procedural alignment across multiple regions simultaneously. The assistant near the entrance had fully stepped away from any operational involvement, his presence now reduced to passive observation. Outside the glass, both vehicles remained motionless, their alignment unchanged, reinforcing the sense that this moment was being mirrored externally at a corporate level. One of the board members leaned forward on the screen, reviewing the executive continuity request in detail, his eyes scanning through operational history layers, compliance reports, and structural governance maps that extended across multiple retail divisions. "We are now observing full system convergence," he said calmly, his voice carried through the store speakers with precise clarity. Another board member followed, referencing regional authority synchronization metrics and confirming that multiple branches had already begun passive alignment with the same system state. Kevin's attention shifted slightly toward the screens again, and for the first time, he did not look for control or interruption. He was simply observing the scale of what was unfolding beyond his understanding. I reviewed the confirmation layer once more. The system was no longer requesting simple approval. It had expanded into a full structural transition protocol, meaning that the decision would define operational governance across all connected retail networks under this brand architecture. The data visualization shifted again, revealing a global map of synchronized luxury operations, each node reflecting live status updates, leadership assignments, and performance integrity metrics. The board's presence remained steady, their expressions neutral, waiting for final authorization. Kevin exhaled slowly, his voice barely audible when he spoke. "This is not about this store anymore," he said, almost to himself. The man in the suit nodded slightly but did not respond verbally. The system interface responded instead, highlighting the executive continuity request again with increased brightness, indicating maximum readiness for implementation. A new layer of information unfolded beneath it, showing cascading operational dependencies that would adjust automatically if the transition was approved. The board's lead voice returned calm and precise. "If you proceed, full structural governance will unify under your executive profile across all verified regions." The statement carried no emotional weight, only procedural clarity. The store itself felt quieter now, as if every mechanical system had shifted into a standby mode awaiting instruction. Even the ambient sound of the air circulation system felt reduced, replaced by a subtle electronic hum from the synchronized interface network. I studied the confirmation field again, then looked at the expanded system architecture displaying across all screens. It was no longer a question of access. It was a question of direction. Kevin took a small step back from the counter, his posture no longer defensive but detached, as if he was slowly accepting that his role had already been fully reclassified within the system hierarchy. The assistant at the entrance remained still, his attention fixed on the board feeds, which continued to display synchronized regional responses preparing for potential transition alignment. Outside, the street remained unchanged, normal life continuing beyond the glass, completely unaware of the structural shift unfolding inside. The board members waited without speaking, their presence steady across the digital interface, reinforcing the gravity of the moment. I placed my hand directly above the final confirmation layer. The system responded immediately, expanding the interface into full resolution mode. Every connected node, every regional branch, every operational framework appeared at once, forming a unified structure of corporate governance awaiting activation. Kevin looked at the screen one last time, then lowered his gaze slightly, no longer trying to interpret what he was witnessing. The man in the suit stepped back half a pace, acknowledging the threshold being reached. The board remained silent, their attention focused entirely on the decision point now centered on my input. The executive continuity request pulsed steadily, and as my finger hovered just above the final activation field, the entire system entered a locked synchronization state, waiting for the moment that would determine whether the network would remain divided or become unified under a single command structure. And in that suspended silence, every screen, every camera, and every connected system across the store and beyond held its breath for the final decision. The system entered a fully locked synchronization state, and for a brief moment the entire luxury store felt suspended between two possible realities, one where the executive continuity request would unify the entire network, and another where it would remain unresolved in permanent administrative suspension. The board interface remained active across every screen, their faces steady and silent, watching the final decision point with controlled expectation rather than urgency. Kevin Miller had not moved for several seconds. His posture remained fixed near the counter, but his attention was no longer on me or the system directly. It was on the inevitability of something larger than personal authority. The man in the suit stood slightly behind me, his presence unchanged, but his focus sharpened toward the board transmission layer as if tracking procedural alignment across multiple unseen systems. The assistant near the entrance had completely stopped interacting with anything in the environment, now fully absorbed into passive observation of the corporate feed. Outside the glass storefront, the vehicles remained aligned in exact position, reinforcing the sense that the external world was synchronized with the internal decision state. The executive board lead spoke again, his voice calm, precise, and stripped of any emotional fluctuation. "We are holding at final confirmation threshold," he said. "All regional systems are in standby alignment." The phrase was followed by a subtle shift in the interface, as additional global nodes appeared on the map, indicating that even more divisions were now passively connecting to the same decision framework. The scale had expanded beyond what was visible minutes earlier. I kept my hand steady above the final activation layer. The system responded by increasing interface resolution, sharpening every data point, every structural map, every governance layer into absolute clarity. It was no longer just a request for authority transfer. It had become a structural redefinition protocol spanning multiple operational territories. Kevin finally spoke again, but his voice carried none of the earlier resistance. It was quieter, more fragmented. "If you press that," he said, pausing slightly, "this is no longer just a stored decision." The sentence ended without force, as if he already understood the answer. I did not respond immediately. Instead, I reviewed the final system projection. It showed cascading governance adjustments that would extend across regional leadership structures, compliance frameworks, and executive decision hierarchies. Every layer of the organization was represented in real time, awaiting synchronization input. The board members on the screens remained silent, their expressions unchanged, but their attention fully locked on the final decision interface. One of them finally spoke, her tone measured and formal. "Confirmation will initiate full structural unification across all active regions under your executive authority." The words were not persuasive. They were procedural. The store environment itself felt different now, not physically altered, but perceptually aligned with the weight of the decision. Even the ambient lighting had stabilized into a neutral state, as if waiting for the system to determine whether it would need to adapt further. The man in the suit shifted his gaze briefly toward Kevin, then back to the screen, but did not intervene. Kevin looked down for a moment, then back up at the interface, his expression no longer defensive or confused, but quietly resigned to the fact that whatever hierarchy he had operated under no longer applied. "I did not understand what I was part of," he said softly, almost to himself. The assistant near the entrance lowered his head further, avoiding direct engagement with the board feed entirely. Outside, the vehicles remained motionless, and the street beyond continued in normal rhythm, completely detached from the structural shift unfolding inside. The system emitted a single soft tone, signaling readiness for final execution. The executive continuity layer expanded again, presenting a final confirmation field that occupied the entire interface across all connected screens. Every data node, every regional branch, every compliance framework converged into a single unified structure awaiting activation. The board members remained perfectly still, their attention unwavering, as if the entire organization had narrowed its focus into this exact moment. I studied the screen carefully, then shifted my focus across the full system map one final time. There were no missing layers, no unresolved connections, no incomplete structures. Everything had already aligned to this point. The system was no longer asking for permission in a traditional sense. It was waiting for direction to complete its own prepared evolution. Kevin took one final step back, stopping near the edge of the counter, no longer attempting to interpret outcomes. The man in the suit remained still, observing without interference. The assistant had fully stepped away from all engagement, his role now completely observational. The board interface held steady, every member waiting in synchronized silence. The executive continuity request pulsed once, slow and precise, marking the final threshold before execution, and as my finger remained suspended above the confirmation field, the entire system across the store, the region, and every connected node prepared itself for the moment that would determine whether the structure would remain segmented or unify under a single executive authority layer. And everything fell into absolute silence as the final decision point reached completion readiness. The final confirmation layer remained suspended across every screen in the luxury store, holding the entire system in a state of absolute readiness. The silence inside the space felt different now, no longer tense, but structured, as if the environment itself had accepted that a decision was imminent and irreversible. The executive board members on the digital interface remained perfectly still, their attention locked on the final authorization field. Kevin Miller had not spoken in several moments. He stood near the counter with his hands lowered, no longer attempting to interpret control or authority, only watching the unfolding system with a quiet awareness that everything he understood had already been rewritten. The man in the suit maintained his position behind me, his focus steady on the board feed, tracking procedural synchronization across multiple layers of corporate infrastructure. The assistant near the entrance had fully stepped back from any engagement, his presence now reduced to observation only, mirroring the stillness of the entire room. Outside the glass storefront, the vehicles remained aligned and unmoving, reinforcing the sense that even the external environment had been absorbed into the same structured moment of decision. I kept my hand hovering above the final activation layer, reviewing the expanded system architecture one last time. The interface displayed a complete global network map of all connected luxury retail operations, each node synchronized and awaiting confirmation for unified governance transition. The board lead spoke again through the system, his tone calm and precise, carrying no urgency, only procedural clarity. "We are now at final decision threshold," he said. "All regional and international systems are fully synchronized and awaiting executive authorization input." The words echoed across the store through the integrated audio system, not as pressure, but as confirmation that the entire structure had reached completion readiness. Kevin shifted slightly for the first time in minutes, his gaze moving from the screens to me, then back again, as if trying to locate a point of reference that no longer existed within the framework he had been operating under. His voice came quietly, almost detached. "This is no longer about management," he said. No one responded. The system interface expanded further, displaying cascading governance layers, financial control networks, compliance frameworks, and operational dependencies that extended across multiple continents. Every layer was now visible, fully aligned, and waiting for a single input to determine its structural outcome. The man in the suit finally spoke again, his voice measured and controlled. "If activated, this will initiate full structural unification across all connected divisions under a single executive authority profile." The statement was not dramatic. It was factual. The environment inside the store felt increasingly distant from ordinary reality, as if the physical space had become secondary to the digital architecture now dominating every surface. Even the sound of air circulation seemed subdued, replaced by the soft electronic hum of synchronized system readiness. I studied the final interface layer again. The confirmation field was no longer just a button. It represented a structural pivot point for an entire corporate ecosystem. Kevin took a slow breath, then exhaled, his expression no longer resistant, but quietly resigned. "I did not realize the scale of what I was part of," he said, his words directed more toward understanding than defense. The assistant near the entrance remained completely still, his attention fixed on the board interface, which now displayed synchronized readiness across all global nodes. Outside, the street remained unchanged, unaware of the internal transformation taking place behind the glass walls. The executive board members remained on screen, their expressions steady, waiting without interruption, fully aware that the next moment would determine the structural direction of an entire network. I moved my hand slightly closer to the final activation field. The system responded immediately, increasing resolution clarity and highlighting all dependent frameworks that would be affected by the transition. Every branch, every operational node, every leadership layer was displayed in perfect alignment, showing that nothing remained outside the scope of the decision. Kevin looked down briefly, then back up, no longer trying to predict outcomes, only observing the inevitability of the process unfolding in front of him. The man in the suit stepped half a pace back, maintaining distance as protocol required. The board interface remained silent now, no further commentary, only observation. The executive continuity request pulsed once, slow and deliberate, signaling that the system was fully prepared for execution. I held position above the confirmation layer, scanning the entire structure one final time. There were no inconsistencies, no unresolved dependencies, no missing data layers. Everything had already converged into this moment of decision. The entire store, the regional network, and the global framework beyond it waited in absolute synchronization. Kevin stood still, no longer speaking, his presence reduced to quiet acknowledgement of scale. The assistant near the entrance did not move. The man in the suit remained focused on the interface. The board members held their gaze steady across the digital screens. And as the final system pulse activated, signaling complete readiness across all connected networks, the entire structure waited in suspended silence for the confirmation that would determine whether it remained divided or unified under a single executive authority layer, and the moment stretched forward with absolute stillness as the system prepared to finalize the transition. The system reached a complete synchronized stillness across every connected interface, and for a brief moment it felt as if the entire luxury store had become a single decision point suspended in time. Every screen, every camera feed, and every executive board display remained locked in perfect alignment, waiting for the final confirmation signal that would determine the structural future of the entire network. I kept my hand hovering over the final activation field, reading the last layer of system verification data as it stabilized into full readiness. Kevin Miller stood in the same position near the counter, but his posture had shifted slightly, no longer tense or defensive, only quietly resigned to the scale of what was unfolding beyond his comprehension. The man in the suit remained behind me, still and observant, his attention focused entirely on the executive board feed that now dominated every display surface in the store. The assistant near the entrance had fully disengaged from any operational behavior, standing as a silent observer of the system transition. Outside the glass storefront, the aligned vehicles remained motionless, reinforcing the sense that even the external environment was synchronized with the internal corporate architecture. The board interface across all screens held steady, showing global operational maps, compliance layers, and governance frameworks that were now fully unified in a single pending execution state. The lead board member appeared on the main display, his expression controlled and professional as he spoke through the system. "All structural nodes are now fully synchronized," he said. "Executive continuity protocol is at final threshold." The words echoed through the store with precise clarity, not as urgency, but as confirmation that the entire system had already reached its final stage of preparation. Kevin shifted his gaze slowly between the screens and me, his voice barely audible when he finally spoke. "If this goes through, nothing will operate the same way again," he said. There was no resistance in his tone anymore, only recognition that whatever framework he had known was already dissolving in real time. The system interface expanded again, displaying a complete structural visualization of all connected retail divisions, financial oversight layers, and executive decision pathways across multiple regions. Every component was highlighted in alignment, indicating full readiness for unified governance activation. I reviewed the final confirmation layer again, scanning through every dependency, every operational link, and every compliance structure that would be affected by the transition. There were no errors, no missing data points, no unresolved alerts. The system had already prepared every pathway for execution. The man in the suit finally spoke in a calm, measured tone. "Once initiated, all regional authority structures will consolidate under a single executive control profile." His words were not speculative. They were procedural confirmation of what the system had already determined. The atmosphere inside the store felt increasingly detached from normal physical reality. Even the ambient sound had reduced to a low, steady electronic hum, as if every environmental system had entered standby mode awaiting final instruction. The board members remained silent across the screens, their attention fully focused on the activation field. Kevin lowered his eyes briefly, then looked up again, no longer attempting to interpret the outcome, only observing the inevitability of the process that had already surpassed individual control. "I never understood the scale of what was behind this," he said quietly. No one responded. The assistant near the entrance remained motionless, fully disengaged from any system interaction. Outside, the street continued normally, unaware of the structural convergence occurring behind the glass. I moved my hand slightly closer to the final activation layer. The system responded immediately, increasing interface clarity and highlighting every connected governance node that would be affected by the transition. The global map displayed across the screen showed complete synchronization across all regional divisions, confirming that the system was no longer fragmented in any capacity. The board lead appeared again, his tone unchanged. Final confirmation will initiate full structural unification across all operational regions. The statement hung in the air without emotion or pressure. It was simply the last procedural step before execution. Kevin remained still, his expression now fully neutral, as if he had accepted that his role existed only within the boundaries of what was already decided. The man in the suit maintained his position, watching the final interface layer with precise attention. The system emitted a single synchronized tone across all devices, signaling that every component was now locked into execution readiness. The executive continuity request pulsed steadily on the screen, waiting for input that would finalize the transformation. I held position for a final moment, reviewing the entire structure one last time. There were no inconsistencies, no unresolved elements, no alternative pathways remaining. The system had converged completely. Every screen in the store, every regional node across the network, and every executive layer beyond it remained in perfect alignment, waiting for the final decision that would determine whether the structure remained segmented or unified under a single command architecture. And as the silence deepened into absolute stillness, the entire system waited for the moment that would complete the transition it had already fully prepared to execute. The system remained in a fully synchronized executive state, holding every connected interface across the luxury store in a suspended moment of absolute readiness. No one inside the space moved in any meaningful way. The air itself felt controlled, as if even the environment had been absorbed into the decision architecture that stretched far beyond the physical walls. Every screen continued displaying the unified executive continuity layer, waiting for final execution input. I kept my hand steady above the activation field, reviewing the entire system structure one final time. The global network map remained fully expanded across the interface, showing every connected retail division, compliance system, financial control layer, and executive governance node aligned in perfect synchronization. Kevin Miller stood near the counter without speaking, his expression no longer resisting or questioning, but quietly absorbing the reality that everything he had understood about authority had already been redefined. The man in the suit remained behind me, his posture unchanged, his attention locked on the board interface, tracking procedural readiness with calm precision. The assistant near the entrance stayed motionless, fully disengaged from operational involvement, now only an observer of the unfolding system transition. Outside the glass storefront, the vehicles remained in exact alignment, reinforcing the sense that the external environment was also synchronized with the internal structure. The board members across the digital interface remained silent, their expressions steady and focused as they observed the final threshold state. The lead board member finally spoke again through the system, his tone controlled and formal. "We are now at final execution readiness," he said. "All global nodes are synchronized and awaiting confirmation input." The statement confirmed that the system had reached full convergence across all operational regions. Kevin's gaze shifted slightly toward the screen, then back toward me, his voice quiet and uncertain. "Once this happens, there is no reversal," he said. No one responded. The system interface responded instead, expanding the executive continuity layer across all screens with maximum clarity. Every dependency, every governance structure, every operational branch was now displayed as part of a single unified architecture ready for activation. I reviewed the entire system again, scanning through global compliance layers, financial oversight frameworks, and leadership hierarchies that had already been aligned through automated synchronization protocols. There were no inconsistencies, no unresolved flags, no structural gaps remaining. The system had already completed its own preparation. The man in the suit spoke once more, his voice calm and procedural. At activation, all regional authority structures will consolidate under unified executive governance across every connected division. His words carried no persuasion, only confirmation of what the system had already established. The atmosphere inside the store felt increasingly distant from normal perception. Even the lighting appeared stabilized, as if every environmental system had shifted into standby mode awaiting final instruction. The board members remained visible across the screens, silent and attentive, their focus fully locked on the activation layer. Kevin lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up again, his expression now fully settled into acceptance rather than resistance. "I never thought it would reach this level," he said quietly. No one answered. The assistant near the entrance remained still, his attention fixed on the synchronized interface. Outside, the street continued in normal motion, completely unaware of the structural transformation unfolding behind the glass. I moved my hand slightly closer to the final confirmation field. The system responded instantly, increasing resolution across every display and highlighting all connected governance nodes that would be affected by the transition. The global map showed complete alignment across every region, confirming full structural readiness. The board lead appeared again on the main screen, his expression unchanged. "Final confirmation will initiate complete structural unification across all operational networks," he stated. The words echoed across the store without urgency or emotion. Kevin remained still, no longer attempting to interpret outcomes, only observing the final stage of a process already beyond individual control. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, maintaining professional distance as protocol required. The system emitted a single steady tone across all interfaces, signaling that every component was locked into execution state. The executive continuity request pulsed once more, slow and deliberate, marking the final threshold before activation. I held position for a final moment, reviewing every layer of the system architecture one last time. Everything was aligned. Every node, every framework, every governance layer across the global network was synchronized and ready. The entire structure had converged into a single unified decision point. Kevin stood in silence, fully aware that his role existed only within what had already been determined. The assistant remained motionless. The man in the suit watched without interference. The board members held their gaze steady across the digital interface. And as the system entered absolute synchronization lock, the final moment of decision stretched forward in complete silence, waiting for the confirmation that would define the future structure of everything connected to it. The system held its final synchronization state across every connected interface, and the entire luxury store remained suspended in a controlled silence that felt almost artificial in its precision. Every screen, every camera feed, and every executive board display continued to show the unified governance structure in a fully prepared execution state. I stood at the center of the interface layer, my hand still hovering over the final confirmation field, while the system maintained absolute readiness across all global nodes. Kevin Miller had not spoken for several moments. His posture remained fixed near the counter, but his expression had shifted into something quieter, no longer resistance, no longer confusion, only the slow acceptance that everything he had known about authority was no longer valid within this structure. The man in the suit remained behind me, observing the board interface with unchanged focus, his attention tracking procedural stability across the synchronized network. The assistant near the entrance remained completely still, disengaged from all operational functions, fully reduced to passive observation. Outside the glass storefront, the vehicles remained in perfect alignment, reinforcing the sense that even external reality had been absorbed into the same synchronized decision environment. The board members across the digital interface remained silent, their expressions steady and controlled, watching the final threshold without interruption. The lead board member finally spoke through the system, his voice calm and precise. "We are at final execution readiness," he said. "All global operational nodes are fully synchronized and awaiting confirmation input." The statement confirmed that the system had reached complete convergence across every connected structure. Kevin shifted slightly, his voice low and almost detached. "There is no version of this where things remain the same," he said. No one responded. The system interface expanded further, filling every screen in the store with the complete global architecture of connected governance systems. Every division, every compliance framework, every financial oversight layer was now displayed in perfect alignment, waiting for final activation. I reviewed the entire structure again, scanning through every node and dependency that would be affected by the transition. There were no inconsistencies. There were no unresolved systems. Everything had already been prepared for this exact moment. The man in the suit spoke quietly, maintaining professional distance. "Once confirmed, all regional and international authority structures will consolidate under unified executive governance," he said. His tone remained procedural, without urgency or persuasion. The environment inside the store felt increasingly distant from ordinary perception. Even the lighting had stabilized into a uniform tone, as if the space itself had adjusted to the weight of the decision being held in suspension. The board members remained visible across all screens, silent and focused, their attention fully directed toward the final confirmation layer. Kevin lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up again, his expression no longer resisting or questioning, only acknowledging the scale of what had already been set in motion. "This is beyond anything I understood," he said quietly. No one answered. The assistant near the entrance remained motionless, his attention fixed on the synchronized interface. Outside, the street continued in normal motion, completely unaware of the structural transformation unfolding behind the glass. I moved my hand closer to the final activation field. The system responded immediately, increasing resolution across every display and highlighting all connected governance nodes that would be affected by the transition. The global map showed complete alignment across all regions, confirming full structural readiness for execution. The board lead appeared again on the screen, his expression unchanged. "Final confirmation will initiate complete structural unification across all operational networks," he stated. The words carried no emotional weight. They were simply the final procedural step before execution. Kevin remained still, no longer attempting to interpret the outcome, only observing the final state of a system already beyond individual control. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, maintaining protocol distance. The system emitted a single steady tone across all interfaces, signaling that every component was locked into execution readiness. The executive continuity request pulsed once more, slow and deliberate, marking the final threshold before activation. I held position for a final moment, reviewing every layer of the system architecture one last time. Everything was aligned. Every node, every framework, every governance structure across the global network was fully synchronized and prepared. The entire system had converged into a single unified decision point. Kevin stood in silence, fully aware that his presence no longer influenced any outcome. The assistant remained still. The man in the suit observed without interference. The board members held their gaze steady across the digital interface. And as the system entered absolute synchronization lock, the final moment stretched forward in complete silence, awaiting the confirmation that would determine the future structure of everything connected to it. The system remained in complete execution lock across every connected interface, holding the entire luxury store, the regional network, and the global governance structure in a single suspended moment of absolute synchronization. Every screen in the boutique displayed the unified executive architecture, every camera feed remained aligned, and every operational layer across the system waited in silence for the final confirmation input. I stood at the center of the interface, my hands still positioned above the activation field, while the entire structure held its breath in procedural stillness. Kevin Miller did not move. His presence near the counter had become almost static, no longer representing authority or resistance, only acknowledgement that the system had already moved beyond him entirely. The man in the suit remained behind me, observing the board interface with the same controlled focus, tracking the final synchronization layer across all active nodes. The assistant near the entrance stood completely still, disengaged from all functions, reduced to observation alone. Outside the glass storefront, the vehicles remained perfectly aligned, reinforcing the sense that external reality had been fully synchronized with internal system architecture. The board members across the digital interface remained silent, their attention fixed on the final confirmation layer, their expressions steady and unchanged. The lead board member finally spoke through the system, his voice calm and precise. "All global operational frameworks are now fully synchronized," he said. "Final confirmation will initiate complete structural unification." The statement confirmed that every regional, national, and international node was already prepared for execution. Kevin shifted slightly, his voice quiet and distant. "So this is the moment everything changes," he said. No one responded. The system interface expanded across every screen, showing the entire global architecture of interconnected governance systems in perfect alignment. Every division, every compliance layer, every financial and operational framework was fully integrated into a single unified structure awaiting activation. I reviewed the entire system one final time. There were no inconsistencies. No unresolved dependencies. No remaining alerts. The structure had already completed its own preparation. The man in the suit spoke softly, maintaining professional distance. "Once confirmed, all operational authority will consolidate under a unified executive profile across all regions," he said. His tone remained procedural, without emphasis or persuasion. The environment inside the store felt increasingly detached from normal physical perception. Even the lighting remained steady and uniform, as if the space itself had entered a controlled state of observation. The board members remained visible across the screens, silent and focused, fully aligned with the final decision point. Kevin lowered his gaze briefly, then looked up again, his expression now fully neutral. "I understand now," he said quietly. No one answered. The assistant near the entrance remained motionless, his attention fixed on the synchronized interface. Outside, the street continued in normal rhythm, completely unaware of the structural transformation unfolding behind the glass walls. I moved my hand slowly toward the final confirmation field. The system responded instantly, increasing resolution across all displays and highlighting every connected governance node that would be affected by the transition. The global map showed complete structural alignment across every region, confirming full readiness for execution. The board lead appeared once more on the main screen, his expression unchanged. "Final confirmation will initiate full structural unification across all operational networks," he stated. The words carried no urgency. They were simply the last procedural acknowledgement before execution. Kevin remained still, no longer attempting to interpret or resist, only observing the final state of a system already beyond individual control. The man in the suit stepped back slightly, maintaining protocol distance. The system emitted a single steady tone across all interfaces, signaling that every component was locked into execution readiness. The executive continuity request pulsed one final time, slow and deliberate, marking the absolute threshold before activation. I held position for a final moment, reviewing every layer of the system architecture one last time. Everything was aligned. Every node, every framework, every governance structure across the entire global network was fully synchronized and prepared. The system had converged into a single unified decision point with no remaining alternatives. Kevin stood in silence, fully aware that his presence no longer influenced any outcome. The assistant remained still. The man in the suit observed without interference. The board members held their gaze steady across the digital interface. And as the final moment of absolute synchronization reached completion, the entire system waited in complete silence for the confirmation that would determine the unified future of everything connected to it, holding the world of operations suspended in a single irreversible instant before execution.